This is it, Madeline. Just breathe. You can do this. Released in 2018, Celeste really is a video game about climbing a mountain. You play as Madeline, a young adult who's riddled with anxiety, but who challenges herself to climb Celeste Mountain. On her adventure, she is faced by all sorts of adversaries. From an old lady to an overprotective doppelganger, Madeline is constantly reminded of her emotional trauma, while continuing to push herself further. It's a game which excels in storytelling and gameplay, however in my opinion, it's the soundtrack that takes the pie. The composer Lena Raine has demonstrated that video game music isn't an afterthought, and as I analyse one of her many masterpieces, In the Mirror, hopefully you will see how she creates immersive atmospheres aimed at capturing Madeline's anxiety. For those unaware, late game Madeline is accompanied by a hiker named Theo, but upon stumbling into the ancient ruins known as the Mirror Temple, she loses him and delves into the depths after him. Deep into the temple she reaches a large mirror, likely the temple's namesake, but enters a trance to awaken trapped within it. And hence, In the Mirror begins. The level itself is symbolic, shaped around the inner turmoil of Madeline and Theo, and forcing them to literally face themselves. Do note, however, the level's music is not representative of the characters' damaged identities, but rather, Madeline's emotions reflected as atmosphere for us the player to hear. Furthermore, it's also tied to the narrative, which will be touched upon. To understand In the Mirror, some elements of the soundtrack need explaining. First and foremost, Madeline is represented by piano. This was confirmed by Raine in her 1 year later article, and it's captured well by Madeline and Theo. A piano and acoustic guitar duet, where the rustic guitar clearly represents Theo, as it's only ever used in his presence. Another use of timbre is to familiarise themes. On her way to the Mirror Temple, Madeline endures a panic attack. It's an emotional moment accompanied by anxiety. A piece which begins as a manipulated version of the game's main motif on piano, however it quickly becomes overpowered by siren-like synthesizers. These synths blare, only disappearing once Madeline begins to breathe. From this experience alone, Raine has subconsciously conditioned the player to associate piano with Madeline's control over her emotions, while the siren synth is used to convey anxiety. And this is exceedingly important, since In the Mirror begins with the exact same synth in absence of a piano. Take a listen. Awakening inside the mirror, Madeline's initial shock is painted perfectly by this introduction. She's beginning to panic, and so, the music paints an atmosphere of anxiety. So here's a question. What makes the main synthesizer in this piece so jarring to listen to? Lena Raine is proficient in personalizing synthesizers and heavily customizes their timbre. Using low frequency oscillation or LFO effects, rhythmic sweeps altering the sound of the synth, she makes even hell notes unnerving. This essentially changes the wave shape produced. It's constantly phasing, making the texture sound full and noisy, despite the piece being homophonic. By creating so much to focus on, the piece feels overwhelming. In addition to this, both LFO effects for frequency and amplitude are used to create tremolo and vibrato. The tremolo has a nerve-wracking shuddering effect, while the constant vibrato creates off-key notes, both of which put the listener on edge, and in doing so, capture the disturbed atmosphere. Next, we should discuss the melody, or lack thereof. Unlike the rest of this melodically colourful soundtrack, the closest the introduction has to one are held 4-beat notes. Accompanied by additional synths, it appears to be in a minor key, but the first 4 notes played are G, F, G sharp, G. Unlike most atmospheric pieces, which are based on a certain scale or chord progression, these notes are only related chromatically. Some may fail to see how this impacts the atmosphere, since those notes are actually played separately and the backings harmonise, but the synthesizers fade in and out and cross over. As a result, there are brief moments of suspension where the harmonies and main synthesizer clash, making the piece temporarily dissonant. This obviously works to a similar effect as the LFO effects, making the piece uncomfortable. Now before we move on, let's look at duration. Madeline encounters strange enemies, inner demons which result in death upon impact. Signifying their presence, percussion fades in, revealing the tempo as 100 beats per minute. Lena Raine states in her article, A Bit About Percussion, that any music you can dance to is perfect for combat, and in turn so, it is for conflicts of any nature. This statement holds true for Celeste, where enemy encounters are represented in pieces such as Resurrections and Scattered and Lost by exhilarating drumming. So, does Raine's statement hold true for In the Mirror? Well, it does in part. The bass drums and toms play a beat at the start of each bar, except they also feature sporadic drum patterns every 2 bars. Meanwhile to Clash, the hi-hat continuously hits quaver-long triplets, leaving out every 3rd note and often adding random embellishments. The fast against the slow, the use of polyrhythms, the foreboding bass drum against the unnatural sounding hi-hat all culminate to create a rhythm that cannot be danced to. This is an exception where Raine intentionally breaks her own trope. This isn't meant to be a conflict. You're meant to run. It's not meant to be invigorating, it's meant to be frightening, and from this point onwards, in any room with these inner demons, percussion is present. But finally we're out of the first section and greeted with relief as Madeline enters a massive chamber shrouded in darkness. Immediately there is a large tonal shift. The siren synths disappear, leaving a melancholy yet serene breakdown as Madeline begins to take control. Here the ambience is still in minor key, however the common notes played are diatonic, including C, D sharp, F and G, which establishes the C minor chord with a suspended F. It's also worth mentioning that the tempo and meter are nearly impossible to establish. This section is atmospheric with synths fading in and out, with no clear starting point. This is a subtle way of maintaining anxiety, reminding the player that they are lost in a dark abyss. And to fit this tone, the final addition is backmasked dialogue, reversed audio of Madeline speaking to herself, which sounds like troubled whimpers. Unlike the introduction, the atmosphere is daunting, however no longer aggressive, as Madeline is gaining confidence, but is now desperate to find a lost friend. And she does. Madeline finds Theo trapped in his own doubts, and a reversed version of Quiet and Falling's piano melody is layered on. This theme is the level's music before entering the mirror, and elements are used throughout the piece, such as certain synths and wisping sand sound effects, used to establish the vast ancient space. On surface level, this appears to be a smart nod to mirrors creating flipped reflections. However, the technique is formally known as the reverse tape effect, and it's most prominently heard in psychedelic music. This fits the level perfectly, as it's shaped around psyche, and the whole concept is looking into the mirror and literally reflecting upon oneself. Narratively, this is also important, since as we discussed earlier, piano represents Madeline's emotional control. She's found Theo, and now she feels brave. On a side note, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the rubato used in Quiet and Falling, and how it interacts with the reverse tape effect. Originally the rubato is used to drive the piece, speeding up before suddenly slowing down, a leap of faith into the unknown. This works to describe Madeline entering the Mirror Temple, however reversed, it's hesitation before suddenly speeding up. This uncertainty builds a musical connection to the atmosphere created by the environment and gameplay, where you must jump into apparent death pits only to discover that there is ground beneath the darkness. You the player must take a leap of faith and face the game's conditioning that holes are death. At this point in the story, all the pieces are in place for its conclusion. Madeline is prepared to carry her incapacitated friend to the end, and now with her newfound confidence, she's ready to tackle her troubles head on. Musically, this is a combination of the previous sections. It incorporates strong themes of anxiety by reintroducing the siren synths, the LFO effects, and dissonance. Nevertheless, what remains from the middle section is piano. Within the damaged atmosphere, a lone piano plays the quieter full-length theme backwards. However, it's not reversed this time. Playing the actual notes backwards allows it to remove the disturbing undertone, however sustaining that theme of reflection. Remember, Madeline is scared, but she's not weak. This all impacts the atmosphere, as the strong piano line brings a sense of triumph and hope, spurring the player on for the home stretch. Only at the very end is a final distorted synthesizer added, a final boss in the music which continues to distort and heighten in volume, rewarding the player with the emotional payoff of silence when you reach the end goal. I hope that you've enjoyed this analysis of Lena Raine's In the Mirror. Her use of timbre, duration and harmony is ingenious. Not only does this piece stand out to me as a fantastic video game composition, but one of my favourite narrative pieces I've heard. It's a nerve-wracking display of mental illness and music, painting anxiety, while telling Madeline's story perfectly.